3.1 Introduction. Dispersal and movement of species from one place to another is a natural process and important for the distribution of life in this world. On a longer time scale, we can say that dispersal is one of driver for evolution of species and responsible for life. Generally, these dispersal and movement is confined to an area and often limited by multiple barriers such as mountains, rivers, lakes, oceans and deserts. Species limited to such confined area are known as native species. Every species take advantage of dispersal and make profit in distribution and range from these processes to flourishes itself. Man had overcome all these barriers and distributed itself in every part of the world. The success story of humans in evolutionary timescale is also due to his mental skills and the capability to domesticate wild species of plants and animals in different regions of the world and utilize them for his benefit. For example, wheat, maize and rice which may be originated and domesticated in different part of world are now the major cereal crops of the world. There are hundreds of plant species such as vegetables, potatoes, tomatoes, chilies, brinjal etc. commercial crops groundnut, sugarcane, coffee, tea etc. medicinal plants cinchona, ephedra, aloe etc. and animals sheep, horses, cow, pigs etc. which were always accompanied by man, transported and introduced from one place to another all around the world for his benefit. Every process has its pros and cons, while the brighter side is the benefits and economic prospects of the new species introduced in non-native lands, but darker side is that some species unintentionally accompanied with useful species such as weeds, pests, bacteria and viruses. These species created problems such as epidemics, famines, habitat destruction and homogenization of the biota. Weeds and pests impacts our agriculture yields while human pathogens can directly link with humans and costs millions of valuable lives. Some species escaped from cultivation lands, botanical gardens and other such human repositories and spread in the nearby forest and other habitat. These species always accompanied us and move with the human movement to the new places. Globalization and fast convenient means of. Paper 03 Biodiversity and Conservation. Transportation with intercontinental connection rapidly increased the distribution of hundreds and thousands of species intentionally or unintentionally worldwide. Species introduced to new habitat in a distant land outside their native range separated through geographical barrier are known as alien species or exotic species or non-native species. In the medieval period, pathogen Yersinia pestis, which resides in mice and rats causes plague and killed about one-third of the European population. The potato blight caused by Phytophthora infestans, a fungus pathogen spread from North America reduced the Irish population to half its size in 1840. The present time's biggest pandemic is AIDS caused by human immunodeficiency virus spread from Central Africa to the rest of the world. At present HIV has infected 1% of the world population. Besides pathogens, animals like in mammals such as domestic cat Felis catus, macaque monkey, Macaca fascicularis, birds such as Indian myna, Acriduthers tristis, starlings, Sturnus vulgaris, and in plants Acacia myrnesi, Lantana camara and Rubus ellipticus are all included in 100 most worst invasive alien species list, compiled Besides pathogens, animals like in mammals such as domestic cat Felis catus, macaque monkey, Macaca fascicularis, birds such as Indian myna, Acriduthers tristis, starlings, Sturnus vulgaris, and in plants Acacia myrnesi, Lantana camara and Rubus ellipticus are all included in 100 most worst invasive alien species list, compiled by Global Invasive Species Program Kit. Besides pathogens, animals like in mammals such as domestic cat Felis catus. Every year lots countries spend huge amount of money to manage and control these alien species. Biological invasion refers to the disruption of natural communities and ecosystems by increase in distribution and abundance of alien species outside the native range. Studies on biological invasion documented the role of alien species in extinction of native species, disruption of essential ecosystem processes, ill effects on human and animal health and losses to economy of the region they invade. That's why it is important to understand alien invasive species behavior and generate strategies to manage alien invasive species. 3.2 Historical backgrounds. Earlier in 18th century, many naturalists like Charles Darwin, Alphonse de Candolle, and Joseph Hooker had mentioned invasive species. They studied these species more as a curiosity as an adaptation of species in new environment rather than major threat to global biodiversity. Charles Darwin gave the first theory in On the Origin of Species 1859, whereas Alphonse de Candolle learned that flora is gained by naturalization. Darwin in the last edition of Asa Gray's Manual of the Flora of the Northern United States enumerated 260 naturalized species that belong to 162 genera. It was Charles Sutherland Elton in 1958 who. Paper 03 Biodiversity and Conservation. Realize the typical pattern of biological invasion and write the book on the ecology of invasions by animals and plants first time in the world. He was considered as the founder of biological invasion. He was first to realize that mixing of numerous organisms of different part of the world will cause problems to the world. Though the work on biological invasion remained in slow pace up to 1980, the Scientific Committee on Problems of the Environment of UNESCO scope in second half of the 1980s set a program to revisit the key assumption and generalized proposals in Elton's pioneering book and to review the current status of invasions in many parts of the world. The program based on 3 questions. 1. What makes certain species more invasive than other? 2. What features of ecosystems make them susceptible to invasion? And 3. How can we use such knowledge to manage invasion? 2.3 Terminologies and frameworks in invasions. Biological invasion is new field and due to increased number of research after 1980 many new terminologies were used in research publications to explain the process of biological invasion from all over world. These terminologies lead to confusion to the readers and it was realized soon to clarify these terminologies. Different terms used in biological invasion such as invasive, naturalized, alien, and non-invasive, need are defined in box 1. 3.4 Major hypotheses and theories. There are multiple hypotheses to explain invasions and researchers classified them in 2 categories, ecological hypothesis and evolutionary hypothesis. These hypotheses help to understand the species adaptation and establishment of a species in a non-native land. Williamson and Fitter 1996 have proposed the TANS rule for a species to become invasive species in non-native land. This rule states that the probability of a species to become invasive is 10% at every stage from introduction to invasion. 3.4.1 Ecological hypothesis. It explains invasions and successful pre-adaptation in a new range with long association of humans and ecosystem modified by humans. Some of the hypothesis explained in Table 1. Paper 03 Biodiversity and Conservation. Box 1 Key terms for biological invasions. Table 1 Ecological hypotheses. Hypothesis explanation. Empty niche hypothesis, Elton 1958. Invasive species able to use resources not used by native species are used efficiently and create new ecological niche in a community. Superior competitors, Saxon Brown 2000. Superior predators, Wiles et al. 2004. Invasive species are superior to native species, hence they utilize the resources and displace the native species. Novel weapons hypothesis, Callaway and Ridenour 2004. Invasive species possess biochemical weapons that are novel to native inhabitant of the invaded community. Enemy release hypothesis, Williams 1954. Introduced species escaped from the pests of their native range, thus reduces the enemy in the introduced region. 84% fewer fungi and 24% fewer virus species infect the introduced species in their naturalized range compared to native ranges. Propagule pressure, Lonsdale, 1999. High supply, size, and frequency number of the plant propagule introductions increase chance of successful invasion due to high genetic diversity, seed swamping, continual supplementation, higher probability of introduction to favorable environment. Alien species. Plant species whose occurrence in a given area is due to their introduction, intentionally or accidentally, as a result of human activity. Synonyms: exotic species, introduced species, non-native species, non-indigenous species. Casual species. Alien species that may flourish in an area, but which do not persist for more than one life cycle without further introductions. Naturalized species. Alien species that reproduce and sustain populations over more than one life cycle without direct intervention by humans, or in spite of human intervention they often recruit offspring freely, but often just near adult species, and do not necessarily invade natural, semi-natural or human-made ecosystems. Weeds. Plant species not necessarily alien, those are undesirable from human point of view in gardens, agricultural fields, plantations and lawns. These are usually taxa with detectable economic or environmental effects. Synonyms: pests, harmful plants, problematic plants. Invasive species. Alien species that recruit reproductive offspring, often in very large numbers at considerable distances from parent species, and thus have the potential to spread at a considerable rate. Propagule pressure. A composite measure of the number of individuals or propagules such as seeds released into region to which they are not native. It incorporates estimates of the absolute number of individuals involved in any one release event propagule size and the number of discrete release propagule number. As the number of releases and or the number of individuals released increases and or time increase, propagule pressure also increases. Synonym: introduction effort. Transformer species. A subset of invasive species which change the character, condition, form or nature of ecosystem over a substantial area relative to the extent of that ecosystem. Paper 03 Biodiversity and Conservation. 3.4.2 Evolutionary hypotheses. It is developed due to potential role of evolution or realized in the success of invasive species. Evolution contribute important role in the success of introduced species and relative fitness of the individuals in the population as compared to the native populations, leading to strong invasion. Some of the hypothesis explained in Table 2. There are various hypotheses given by many researchers from all over the world, most of them based on small subset of invasive species under particular environment conditions, in which few became popular and discussed whereas other were discarded. Many of these hypotheses works mutually on the species at different stages of its adaptation and establishment in the new range. To understand the biological invasion, there is a need of daunting task which will be responsible for further explanation to understand the invasion in future. Table 2. Evolutionary hypotheses. Hypothesis explanation. The evolution of increased competitive ability. Hypothesis EICA, Blasi and Notzold 1995. Invader released from enemies in its native range, could reallocate resources formerly used for defense to growth, reproduction and other attributes generally increasing competitive abilities. Hybridization initially decreases fitness, but due to combination of selection and backcrossing result in individuals with higher fitness than in the case for their hybridizing parents. Founder effect which is associated with bottlenecks and convert epistatic variants into additive genetic variants and enhance the potential for a response to selection. If there is a multiple introduction of a species from different native origin leads to strong bottlenecks in population size and enhanced variation among populations in the non-native range compared to genetic variation in any native population. Paper 03 Biodiversity and Conservation. 3.5 Invasion Pathways. Introduction of any species to non-native range requires the pathway or means to cross the geographical barriers such as vast oceans, deserts, rivers and mountain ranges etc. Species sometimes pass these barriers through natural forces like storms, ocean currents or vectors like birds and animals, but their chances of overcoming these hurdles are meager. Man is one of most powerful driving force behind all the introduction of species in the non-native range. Throughout ancient times humans always classified and selected the plant species according to their needs and exploited them. With the dawn of civilization and advancement in agriculture, trades in between the civilization, humans mobilized many alien species to distant lands and continents. In the last century, with increasing and fast means of traveling, human-aided introduction of species increased manifold by intentionally and unintentionally means. Many alien species established and naturalized in the non-native range, but few species spread in vast area and became threat to the local flora and fauna in that region. These species are known as invasive species. Whereas, the whole set of processes which results in the introduction of an alien species from one geographic region to another with vectors including dispersal mechanism and means of introduction is defined as invasion pathways. The main pathways used by invasive species for their rapidly spread in the local area are air, rivers, railway tracks, roads, and their dispersal by vectors manned by vehicles and ships, birds and animals from one region to other. The detailed analysis of human-mediated introduction or pathways includes causes, for introduction, vectors, as physical means or agents, for transportation, routes, and corridors, as geographic paths for transportations. Horticulturists have always given higher preferences to alien species from native species while native species are always valued by the ecologists and environmentalists. In case of invasion pathways, human beings are the prime vector responsible for transportation of invasive species through vehicles, ships and airplanes others than insects, birds and animals which disperse locally or occasionally long distances. Routes can be roads, railways, waterways, corridors and air. In Global Invasive Species Databases GISD, the invasion pathways were divided into 6 categories. Paper 03 Biodiversity and Conservation. 1. Release in nature for use, biological control, erosion control, hunting and fishing in wild, improvement of landscape fauna and for conservation and other unintentional release. 2. Escape agriculture, botanical gardens, zoos, farmed animals, forestry, ornamental, horticulture, research facilities. 3. Transport contamination, contaminated nursery material, food contamination, contamination of plants, animals and seeds, trade and transportation of material. 4. Transport containers, bulk, ship, plane, vehicle, others means of transportation. 5. Corridors, interconnected waterways, basins, seas, tunnels and land bridges. 6. Natural dispersal across borders. The phenomena of different ways invasive species arrive in the non-native range are known as propagule pressure. The human activities such as intensifying agriculture, clearance of the forest for building road, railways, urbanizations and overexploitation of native species timber, fuel woods, food, fodder, medicines and other commercial activities are the reasons behind the spread of alien invasive species. These activities creates disturbance in the natural established ecosystems hence, creating pathway for the establishment of invasive species into further deep in the ecosystem. Human-induced disturbance was associated with the 97% establishment of invasive species. Once the species survived in the non-native land and starts producing new recruits, it further spread in the local area by different means of dispersal such as seeds, suckers, roots, propagules and cuttings. 3.6 Mechanism of invasion. Many theories and framework to explain the mechanism of the biological invasion which created lot of confusion, hence Blackburn 2011 tried to unify these all framework figure 1. First widely accepted framework for biological invasion was by Williamson and Fitter 1996 in case of animals and Richardson 2000 in case of plants. Blackburn took base from Williamson and Fitter 1996 and Richardson 2005 and combine all other available framework to explain the mechanism of invasion. The invasion framework was the Paper 03 Biodiversity and Conservation. Combination of barriers and stages. There were 5 vertical bars which signify barriers and 4 stages written above the bars in the framework proposed by Richardson. In invasion, the species has to overcome these barriers to pass into next stage. Blackburn added the additional barrier of captivity or cultivation after geographical barrier figure 1. The arrows signify the species flow toward next stage and letters in the arrow signify the name of the arrow which is the categorization scheme for the population. He included the arrow B3 for the many species such as some plants, fungi, protists, invertebrates, small fishes and other taxa which can skip captivity or cultivation barrier. The environmental barrier in Richardson's framework was replaced by survival barrier which together with reproduction barrier helps in establishment stage. Once the species was established it remained in C1 and C2 cycle to build enough population lag period for dispersal to long distance. It was very important stage need to overcome by long distance dispersal for naturalized species to spread and successfully invade. Failure in any stage due to barrier is a failure for a species to become invader, which is shown in the diagram with the horizontal bar and the arrow. After the alien species had spread, it undergoes through boom and bust dynamics, which suggest the increase of the population to its peak and then decline. Terminologies were labeled in red color above the diagram, whereas management strategies were drawn in yellow arrow at different stages below the diagram. Conceptualization of invasion is a staged process and not a linear one. In every stage, number of species diminishes, explained as invasion failure, and filtered to reach the next stage. Paper 03 Biodiversity and Conservation. Figure 1 framework developed to understand the process of invasion by Blackburn et al. 2011 in Trends in Ecology and Evolution. 3.7 Successful characters of invasive species. Genetic diversity within the invaded range, such as Phalaris arundinacea, Aluria petiolata, Poraria lobata, and Euphorbia isla, where the historical records tell about their multiple introductions, which may be the source of such diversity. Other plant species invaded aggressively despite having little or no genetic diversity, such as Falopia japonica, Polygonum cuspidatum. Invasive populations of alligator weed, Alternanthera phylloxeroides, and water hyacinth, Eichhornia crassipes, in China are also reported to have very low levels of genetic diversity. Reason for these invasions suggested the rapid clonal spread and dispersal via root or stem fragments in these species for lack of genetic diversity and population genetic structure. Comparison of the genetic diversity of introduced and native population of invasive plant can pinpoint which native population is the source of invader and shows the loss of genetic diversity through founder effect. Diversity data is used to reconstruct invasion histories, reveal how a non-native plant adapts and expands into new territory, can also lead to more effective management strategies. 3.9 Ecological and socioeconomic impacts. The impacts of invasive species such as threat to native flora and fauna, disruption of essential ecosystem processes, ill effects on human and animal health, and losses to economy of the region they invade is an object of socioeconomic interest. Impacts can be measured onto two types. 1. Direct impacts on ecosystem functions and on human welfare. 2. Management and control cost of invasive species plus side effects of introduction of biological control agent. On single species have varieties of effects on ecology, ecosystem services and socio-economic effects, e.g. In Cape region of South Africa, black wattle Acacia murnsi affects the water table, species composition and also recreational functions due to scarcity of water in rivers and lakes. Ecosystem services categorized into 4 main categories are as follows. 1. Supporting services which are necessary for the production of other ecosystem services, e.g. soil formation, nutrient cycling, primary production and habitat stability. 2. Provisional services include the production of products obtained from ecosystem services, e.g. food, fuel, fresh water, genetic resource. Paper 03 Biodiversity and Conservation. 3. Regulating services or benefits supplied by self-maintenance properties of ecosystems, e.g. water regulation, water purification, waste regulation, biological control, pollination, disease control, natural hazard protection and erosion regulation. 4. Cultural services generate non-material benefits derived from ecosystems, e.g. recreational, aesthetics, education and cultural diversity. Alien invasive species has been observed to disrupt all these types of ecosystem services, which are directly and indirectly linked with human well-being. There are almost 500,000 species of plants, animals, and microbes have invaded in different countries of the world, in which 50,000 have been reported in US alone. However, it is difficult to calculate the economic cost caused by invasive species. Pimentel 2005 had calculated $120 billion per year USD damage cost from the invasive alien species in US alone. In Australia, the cost estimated to $13.6 billion USD per year, and cost is increasing with each finance year. Most evidence of economic impact of IAS comes from the developed world. Similarly, there are strong indications that the developing world is experiencing similar problems due to invasive species. Global Invasive Species Program (GISP) was initiated in 1997, internationally, to address the growing problems and adverse effect of invasive species on both natural and managed ecosystems. It had compiled a list of 100 worst alien invasive species in its website, which had cost trillions of USD damage to the different countries, along with ecological and social impacts. Some of the other important international initiatives includes Mountain Invasion Research Network (MIRN) and assessing large-scale risks for biodiversity with tested methods. Alarm and delivering alien invasive species inventories for Europe. DAISY was initiated to address the growing problems and adverse effect of invasive species on both natural and managed ecosystems in large scale. The ultimate goal of all these initiatives is not only to control and eradicate invasive species, but the conservation of biological diversity, protection of human health and prevention of economic losses. These goals can be achieved by ecosystem restoration through reintroducing the native species, preservation of undistributed ecosystem for the establishment of sustainable use by local people. Biological invasion studies programs are launched continentally, mostly by developed nations, for understanding the behaviors of invasive species and managing them. Since the cost of these programs are too much high, that developing in Paper 03 Biodiversity and Conservation. Underdeveloped world are still not able to initiate such programs. It's still a long way to go for preserving and restoring the ecosystem by saving them from biological invasion and restoring the ecosystem services to its normal cycle. 4. Summary. In this lecture we learn about concept of biological invasion, new terminologies used in the topic biological invasion, mechanism of biological invasion, pathways of biological invasion, successful characters of alien invasive species, ecological, social and economic losses due to spread of invasive species.